Let me take you out and bring you in. Hey, peace and love, ladies and gentlemen. Today is number 12 of the 20 for 20. I got today a special guest and teacher, Mr. what we call Mr. Reginald Marbury, but we call him Brother Reggie. All right, some may call him Doctor because of years of him teaching. But ladies and gentlemen, I haven't seen a guy that is consistent as promoting the elders and being as far as being an African in the Americas better than our brother Reggie. He has contributed to this community in so many ways, with the elders passing on the information from the elders onto the new generation. He's a regular teacher on the House of Consciousness, or Sonata Studios, presenting to you, ladies and gentlemen, my big brother and teacher, Brother Reggie. How you doing, Brother Reggie?
Brother Garfield, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to your 20 for 20. I wanted to do something very special, so it took a lot of research, and I'm behind in my other shows. But this is an important show that I think it's important for our audiences.
All right. So what I'm going to do, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bow out and let the teacher teach. That's what you do. When the teacher's around, you just let them teach. And for anyone who wants to donate to my brother Reggie, the Cash App is right there, Reginald Marbury, the $ Reginald Marbury. It's pinned. And I probably will do an after show after this. I mean, Reggie, you could take as long as you want. Just teach, brother. I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm going to allow you to teach. I'm going to bow out. Go ahead, my brother. Do your thing. And good job in advance. All right?
All right.
Family. And if you have questions, family, in the chat, Reggie will stop for a minute, like every 12 to 10 minutes. He's going to stop and check the chat, so you could post your questions in the chat. Peace and love, my brother. Carry on. Teach.
All right, great. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. My name is Reginald A. Mabry. I go by the name of Reggie Mabry, and other platforms, I am Dr. Reggie. And there has been a lot of conversation about identity, and I wanted to talk about some elements that's very helpful in this conversation of identity, and talk about some pathways to reparations and compensations. I've been involved in New York City Council hearings on reparations in New York City, and I have worked with Professor Edward Scobie, who was former president of NCOBRA, and of course Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Professor Small, and a whole group of scholars. And I've also worked at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture at the New York Public Library. A lot of you see me on YouTube, and I do a lot of ancient history. The reason why I do ancient history is to understand the whole dynamic of who we are as a people and where we are today, to provide solutions. So today I'm going to do the illegal slave trade, part one. I'm going to call it part one, and it's a special presentation for Black History Month. A lot of times in Black History Month, we do programs that are talking about ancient history and things like that, but we don't get into some materials that's substantive to what happened. And so the illegal slave trade is a subject that is often missed. So let's just go through this. Okay, so my abstract is, this work is a continuous topic with multifaceted implications. Recently, a YouTuber said that the African Americans are the poorest and African Americans have no power. I guess you know who he is. I'm not going to mention him. He's irrelevant. People like him are of the African world, who are of the African world grossly ignorant of the history of the slave trade in the Americas, to be making statements like that. The African in what would become the United States began our journey as enslaved landing in Virginia in 1619, Hampton, Virginia. The status was first indentured servant. They didn't really know what to do with us, but we were quickly enslaved, and enslaved until 1865. We are still enslaved, but it's a different form of slavery. The status for the African American were beast of burden to grow the world power of the United States. That was our status. then, and that is our status now. This, so the status of the African American was indentured at first for a little while, enslaved, runaway, semi-free without compensation, and semi-free with compensation with the right to vote. But we are still semi-free. The status of citizen with all of its properties has never been obtained by the African in the United States. The periods of the African in America are the following: the transatlantic slave trade, the Catholic nations, the Spanish and the Portuguese, the British, colonial, and Dutch, when they entered the slave trade as they were fighting the Catholic nations and becoming pirates. The the early colonies, which is part of that. And we also need to talk about the British colonies in the Caribbean. And so we really have somewhere around 26 colonies, colonies in the United States and colonies in the Caribbean. We need to talk about the United States slave trade, what they call the legal slave trade. Why? Because it was legal. The colonies of the British, when it was taken over by the United States, they continued it in the state formation of the United States in the early states, and then the legal slave trade of the importation of Africans ended in 1808. Then we go to a period that is not discussed, which is the illegal slave trade. We, of course, know the Civil War, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, the Civil Rights period, the new Jim Crow. But the illegal slave trade is not often covered. I try to do a good job of just going through some elements, but a lot of material, but I have to condense it. So the United States' dirtiest secret is the illegal slave trade. The illegal slave trade is our weapon to hold the United States accountable. There are lots of moving parts, so this is going to be an introduction. Additionally, this lesson is important because our people are in search of identity have called themselves Hebrews, Moors, Hebrew Israelites, Muslims, Negroes, and called internally ourselves names like niggas, taken from what they did. And it's great created narratives that all of our people are these identities, depending on which group is making the claim. So groups are making the claim, the United States is making the claim, but internally we are making claims about who we are, and it seems like we're grossly ignorant. However, evidence shows that the majority of the people enslaved are from West and Central Africa, who are largely indigenous beliefs and Islamic, and then transformed into enslaved Africans, keeping some aspects of their beliefs, but largely transformed. And so we have these concepts of, oh, we're Hebrews, we're Hebrew Israelites, but those people are completely ignorant about African culture and traditions. And they are also completely ignorant about the Islamic movements in Africa. Now, of course, there are special cases of individuals coming from North Africa and some Spanish or Portuguese Hebrews committed into slavery. But they were Spanish or Portuguese Hebrews in that element. And yes, there are special cases. We know about the Abraham Lincoln case of a man saying that he was North African and he was a Moor or something like that. And yes, that's in a record, but those are small individuals compared to what I'm going to show. There are also cases of Europeans Jewry bringing with them their enslaved, right? So Europeans who are participating in the slave trade or bringing in their contraband and converting them into slaves because of the Jewish law of having people in your house circumcised and enslaved. And then there's, of course, people, I didn't mention it in this text, but there are those same groups in South America, and they are bringing in their enslaved, and those enslaved are converted. Um, so conversion doesn't necessarily mean you have any ancient roots. You begin to believe it because of your conversion, and what else do you have? You've been stripped of everything else. So the legal slave trade was a vicious, rapid period of mass involuntary migration or slavery for the purpose of extreme forced labor, having these people little time to do nothing but work sun up and sundown. So people saying that they're bringing their cultures and traditions into no, um, um, all cultures and all cultures and traditions are whether they're from Africa or any other places. There's little time to actually practice. You're enslaved. You're working from sun up to sundown. I've written several articles on the illegal slave trade as a path to argue for reparations. One of them is in the Institute of Black World 21, and it was originally in the Black Agenda Report, where I have other areas that I talked about in the Black Agenda Report, which is an activist, how can I say, uh, e- uh, activist internet website, publication that publishes um, articles that wouldn't necessarily be in modern academia or anything. They're more activist oriented. So I wrote Reparations is Dead, How to Resurrect It with Dr. Jahi Issa. I wrote Reparations is Dead, Authors Seek to Spark Public Discussion of New Legal Strategies. So I converted my concepts with Dr. Issa and Patrick DeLises into um, a legal thinking. Um, I also have seeking reparations by dropping slave claims. That's interesting because most of the reparations movements or concepts is really about the legal slave trade, which you have no bearings because you have no causes of action in legal format because slavery was legal. I also wrote,
Hey, Elder, 1 second, Elder. On your screen, you have sharing StreamYard. Could you hide that thing because it's actually um, blocking your stuff? All right, there you go. All right, sorry for interrupting. Continue,
okay,
brother.
right. I also wrote a legal document to the Supreme Court of the United States for a person who was appealing to he had lost his appeal case and he was he was arguing, trying to get into the Supreme Court, and I wrote a legal document on writ of certiorari to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, brief amicus curiae of African American Research Group, which was Jahi Issa, Reginald Mabry, and Patrick DeLises, who are descendants of human trafficked Africans in support of the petitioner. Normally in a normally in a any case, if you're not representing yourself, you need, of course, you need a lawyer. In the appellate and the Supreme Court, a lawyer has to write the brief. And in my document, I saw that cause, and I knew they were going to deny it, but I wrote a section on how the construction of the laws in the United States permitted Africans from representing themselves on these cases, and that the fact of the matter is no lawyer, black lawyer, would in fact take this case because he's an officer of the court, and there's a lot of pressure on them for being pushed into some frivolous arguments. And I made an argument that African people have never been able to represent themselves. Descendants of Africans have never been able to represent themselves. And prior to that, of course, we were represented by white people. And that's a cause of action for reparations. So those are some of the things that I've written, some of the things I've done. On YouTube, there's a lot of people with a lot of pseudo credentials saying that they're Pan-Africanists, they're Black Power, they're RBG, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they haven't written anything and they haven't argued anything. And that's not the case with me. Essentially, my arguments are that the pleadings about the slavery that was declared legal is not a path to reparation arguments. Um, so anything when slavery was legal, that is not a path for reparations. However, pleadings about the illegal slave trade that benefited the states in our local and state path to holding America accountable for repayment. I wrote that wrong. Um, the pleadings about the illegal slave trade, yeah, is a path because there was a part which I'll talk about, which is the illegal slave trade, where the states of the United States violated their own constitutional act and permitted slavery for engorgement. Um, I mean, profits that were not gained legally, and that they did that in violating the laws of the United States. Simply said another way, is that once you get an enslaved person into the United States, then he's a slave in the United States, and then you could domestically traffic him throughout the other states, right? But the plan for illegal slavery was very profitable to the United States, and thus the states broke their own laws. So we have a huge period within American history. You got to remember, the United States was formed in 1776, but um, the legal slavery ended in 1808. The importation from Africa. So, understanding this shows how our populations grew from the original colonies, colonial slavery after the U.S. declared the importation of the importation illegal, but our populations grew rapidly. This counters the slave breeding farm analysis that the U.S. still holds as a sword against reparations. For the analysis is that our populations grew from breeding. That is their analysis. So that they want to argue, because they don't think that we are actually studying this, that our populations grew from slave breeding and not from the importation of Africans, the illegal importations of Africans, and that is absolutely wrong. So how do we impact this? How do we analyze this to show the impact of it? Well, we simply go to things like the census data, right? The United States recorded their census records. And then we look at the data around the illegal slave trade. Okay, so um, Calvin Pearson is my uh, uh, first cousin, my mother's first cousin, and Calvin Pearson, my mother's Gloria Pearson, maiden name, and it was him that found from records that the first slave landing or enslaved landing happened in Fort Monroe, uh, which was Point Comfort in 1619. And so that is my cousin. And so this journey, this work is in my family. My uncle married Ruby Pierce, Ruby. Wow, my uncle married Ruby Turner. That's recent, and his maybe about 40. Well, I'm 58. About 57 years ago, he married Ruby Turner. He has a son by Nat Turner, descended Ruby Turner, right? I'm from Virginia, Newport News, Virginia. Um, and so I'm what you call, if there is such a word, a foundational Black African. I'm a real foundational Black African. We could play color games about what I look like and maybe what my cousin looks like, right? And what my mother looks like. We could play these color games, but I am my skin color and who I am goes to my family's survival in Virginia, which is one of the first was the first slave state. And so um, you could play color games all you want, but who I am represents survival of my family. My father's from North Carolina, Edgecombe County, and I've been able to been able to trace my family to roughly about 1807, 18, well, roughly about 1807. So I know my grandparents, great grandparents, great great grandparents, great 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 grandparents, and 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 in some cases a little bit further. That is something that you should all do where you, if you can, if there's records. But all of this stuff about who we are, well, you are who your fathers are, right? But you don't know who your father. I happen to know that. So I don't. Anytime I have an argument with any of these groups of people, I put up my family data and ask them to put up their family data. And if they can't, they're liars. Now, some short comments about the slave trade. Okay, so racial differences happened very quickly in the United States and Virginia. And so we have a series of laws of Virginia and British colonial Virginia, 1643, roughly, that begins to change the status of the African as he and she landed in Americas. And so I don't think I want to go through this. I'll just leave it up on the screen. But you can see that the laws were not only for Africans, but it was also for white people. And I'll read one of the acts, 1691. As for the prevention of that abominable mixture and spurious issue which hereafter may increase in its dominion, as well by Negroes, mulattoes, and Indians intermarrying with English or other white women, as by their unlawful accompanying with one another. Be it enacted by the authority or aforesaid, and is hereby enacted that for the time to come, whatsoever English or other white man or woman being free shall intermarry with a Negro, mulatto, or Indian man or woman, bound or free, shall within 3 months after such marriage be banished and removed from this dominion forever, and that justice of each respective county with this dominion make it the particular care, and that is in act be in effectual execution. And it be further enacted that if any English woman, being free, shall have a bastard child by any Negro or mulatto, she pay the sum of £15 sterling within 1 month after such bastard child shall be born to the church wardens of the parish where she shall be delivered of such child, and in default of such payment she shall be taken into the possession of the church wardens and disposed of for 5 years. Okay, so they created these laws so that the African can stay separate from their British. They issued harsh penalties on white British colonials for intermarrying, for having sex. They wanted to keep them separate. Africans and whites and Native Americans, um, for their purposes of continue enslaving the African, and this is by church decree. I have problems with these words, or they may not. We have to read it and read it slow, but you also have to understand that that this is the language that your Bible was in. The language that your Bible was in, you're not reading the language of your King James 16, whatever Bible. It is in this type of language, and the language that you're reading your Bibles in is a revised edition in modern English, etc. And it's not in the Greek, and it's not in the it's not in the Aramaic. It's not in any of the so-called Hebrew. You're reading a revised edition, and that is your preference. But um, the British uh, people read it in this version of the language, and worse. Old English is even worse than this. And so you got it all wrong, family. But let me just stay on topic. So there are more inactions. These actions continue becoming more and more aggressive. A 1662 law stated that the children of enslaved women were automatically born enslaved. This was to clear up the confusion about what to do with the mixed race children born as a result of sexual relationships with a white master and a enslaved woman. So these um, legislative um, how can I say, acts were being more aggressive because now you have a whole group of children that are mulattoes, uh, and that they, to stop them from having any rights, what you do is you immediately create an act to deal with them, and that those mulattoes, their status would be enslaved. Um, hmm. So, moving out of this period, we have the American Revolution, and we have, in fact, the issue followed in the American Revolution. I'm talking about enslavement. So, we have in the Declaration of Independence, for all of you who um, believe in the Constitution of the United States, we have Thomas Jefferson, who had um, long-term iterations with an African, breaking any of those laws secret, but he will ultimately become the president. But now he's in the Continental Congress and all that. He tried to deal with slavery, and he tried to deal with slavery in the Declaration of Independence, and he tried to attack King George for enslavement. Mhm. And he said King George, he has waged a cruel war against human nature, itself violating its most sacred rights of liberty, life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captives and captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation desert, exciting those very people to rise in arms amongst us and to purchase that liberty of which he has been deprived them, by murdering the people on whom he also obtruded them, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another. Um, of course, the Americans are fighting the British. They are looking at King George as the origin of all these particular issues. And so they're attacking him with what King George did with slavery. But immediately the slave planters in Virginia and so off, North Carolina, South Carolina, they had Thomas Jefferson, they had an interest in slavery, so they stripped this. So they stripped this out of the Declaration of Independence. Okay. There's another dynamic. And the dynamic is, and I'm going to address it here, is that there is the illegal slave trade from 1808 to 1860, and there's the origin point of many of the Africans that were enslaved and sent over here. Um, when the slave trade supposedly ended in 1808. So we have the map of the homelands of the enslaved Africans, and we have this pathway into areas where there were slave smuggling routes, and they go into the United States. They're also going largely into South America, the islands of the Caribbean, particularly Cuba and Puerto Rico, Jamaica. Jamaica is a big place where these illegal slaves were had, and then there was islands off of South Carolina. Um, so they're going into the Gulf of Mexico in large numbers after the um, the so-called ending of the transatlantic slavery by the Act for the Prohibition of the illegal slave trade. I'll get that right when I show it. But we have a counter view, which is the American Slave Codes, written by Ned and Constance Sublette, whereas they say that the populations came from Virginia and they were domestically imported. And so that's this is a book by Ned and Constance Sublette to counter that view. Okay, but it falls flat on its face. The the domestic slave trade, yes, there was a domestic slave trade, yes. Um, but to say that Virginia, and Maryland, and Delaware was the bulk of the populations that would go to Kentucky, Tennessee, up the Missouri River, right, and Georgia, will fall flat on its face because of the other data. What happened exactly is that the Africans were imported into these areas and then routed into these up and down the Missouri River, um, and that the domestic slave trade um, carried from these points. And so once the Africans were illegally trafficked into the United States, then they became contraband. And then when they came contraband, then they could be domestically imported. So I have the domestic slave trade from 1790 to 1799, but I have the domestic slave trade from 1820 to 1829. So these are some population numbers where they tried to say that Virginia and some of these other places were the breeding points, but um, breeding it takes roughly 15 to 16 years of a child being able to do labor, and so periods in this particular period, you don't have that much time for women who are in the slave process to have healthy children in numbers to supply the domestic slave trade. So that's what was not happening. What was happening was this over here. This is what was happening. And how do we know this? How do we know this? Well, this is the map that they give us. This is from the Schomburg Centers of the New York Public Library's digital collection, whereas they want to make slavery legal, and they want to say it was breeding, and the paths seem to go to the new states from these areas over here, right? In this particular map, they completely leave out what was happening here. Both of these is from the digital collections of the New York Public Library, but these are just two different analyses. Okay, what do we do with the census records? Well, the census records, uh, I said slavery grew rapidly in the now states of the United States. And so let's look at the census records. So we're looking at the census records of 1790. Let's just start here, 1790. So the amount of slaves in the United States that was counted in 1790 was a little over 500,000, 697,000 slaves, right? Um, and this was the population prior to the illegal slave trade. So roughly 20 years prior to the illegal slave trade, there was 697,000 Africans. The United States census of 1800 was the second census conducted in the United States. It was conducted on August 4th, 1800. It showed that um, 5 million people were living in the United States at that time in total, of whom 893 were enslaved. So from 1800 to from this period to 1800, from 697,000 slaves legally in the legal slave trade. And people are going to say to me, well, slavery is illegal, slavery because slavery is moral. I'm not talking about the immoral. I'm talking about the laws. I mean, book up. I mean, one thing I do is history. The other thing I do is laws. The fact of the matter is, yes, it was legal, but it was not moral. Um, but that doesn't say anything about it being not legal. The morality, who cares about morality in the United States? But the population from 1790 grew 200,000 from still the legal slavery. So that we know importation, we get higher numbers from importation rather than just breeding. Okay, so in 1819, was the third census conducted in the United States. It was conducted on, 1810 was the third census conducted in the United States. It was conducted on August 6, 1810. It showed that now 7 million people, uh, uh, 7 million people were living in the United States, of whom 1,191,362 were enslaved. So this is at the point of the act stopping the importation of Africans. Um, so let's just look at in 1808, from what was happening in Britain or the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom had realized that the American colonists were using their enslaved populations as an army, and that was preventing them from reattacking and recolonizing America. So, we will have the War of 1812 that will come. And so British strategy was, let's end slavery. Let's end slavery, not for the purposes of anything morality. I know you have Somerset and you have Equiano and you have all those type of things that's happening. But the real issue is that Britain always wanted to reconquer the United States. And the United States was successful in the Revolutionary War. You have to remember Africans from Haiti came into the United States and fought in, I think, South Carolina. That was one of the successful, and you have Africans, anytime that you can arm an African to fight. Later in 1812, you will have Lord Dunmore and the Ethiopian regiments. Before that, in the American Revolution, you had Lord Dunmore and the Ethiopian Revolution. Lord Dunmore and the Ethiopian regiments, where they were trying to promise Africans freedom if they fought for the British. And then you have this whole Star Spangled Banner controversy, where the second or third verses start laughing at the British for trying to free Africans and bring them into Canada, right? That was British strategy. So British strategy was never about morality. British strategy was to control the populations in the United States. But anyway, the slave trade, at the Constitutional Convention of 1787, delegates fiercely debated the issue of slavery. They ultimately agreed that the United States would potentially cease importation of slaves in 1808. An act of Congress passed in 1800 made it illegal for Americans to engage in the slave trade between nations and gave U.S. authorities the right to seize slave ships, which was carrying and transporting slaves and confiscate their cargo. Then the act prohibiting the importation of slaves took effect in 1808. However, domestic or coastwide trade in slaves persisted between ports within the United States, as demonstrated in the Slave Manifest and court records. So there's a loophole in this, and the loophole is once you get Africans enslaved into the United States, then they're contraband, right? And then once they're commerce. And so in my paper to the Supreme Court, you got to remember, Brother Reggie wrote a motion to the Supreme Court, right? Analyzing all of the cases that went to the Supreme Court, and none of those cases gave us what the Native Americans got in the Marshall Trilogy, which was the Native Americans got domestic independent sovereignty, the Americans Indians got federal protection, and the American Indians got land. None of those ever dealt with the laws of discovery, right? Um, they just completely never dealt with the status of the African in America and what rights could be granted. In the Civil War, of course, you have the stupid 40 acres and a mule, which was never for all Africans. It was only for those Africans in that particular state where the general, I forgot his name, I don't know if it was Sherman, um, promised those Africans if they fought with him that they would get 40 acres and a mule. But all we really got was the mule. Now, 40 acres is a lot of land, but that was only for those groups of people, and that's when those lands were free to be settled. So, but let's talk about the mule. The mule is what we've always gotten. What is a mule? Um, Morpheus actually helped me with this analysis. Uh, the mule is a animal that can't procreate. So ultimately, their plan was to give these Africans a mule for 40 acres. One mule, you get one mule for 40 acres, but that mule will die. It will get sick, and you will have to go back to the and you will have to go and buy another mule. So all we got in from the promise of a mule that could not, and so that's what I call dead law. Uh, that wasn't for all of us. That was just for those people, and it was really a trick. It's just dead law. You will always have to go back to the establishment to replace that mule and buy more mules, beasts of burden. So they basically said to the African, "We're going to give you a beast of burden, you beasts of burden, and that to replenish, you're going to have to go back to us to get any more mule and provisions and stuff like that." Anyway, the law of 1808 was enacted supposedly to stop the slave trade. So I've said this. I've been researching illegal slave trade for more than 10 years. I said some of this I said. Let me see if there's anything that I didn't say. Okay. So one of the things that I talk about in my articles is the failed Farmer Pellman or Pellman Farmer reparations case that condensed all the other reparations cases into that case, the Cato case, and some other cases that actually had more viability into the Pellman Farmer case, where she argued that we should seek reparations from the banks of that time period as if they have enough money to compensate us, the banks. But mentioned a little bit about the illegal slave trade, but did not make a good argument about the illegal slave trade. So I have countered in articles the Farmer Pellman or Pellman Farmer reparations case, and where Judge Posner of the appellate basically said that basically, first of all, you're not even Farmer Pellman. You have not, as a client of a class, you have not even demonstrated that you was an African American during that period. You've not even showed your family, and and so you're not really part of the class, and you have not proven that these banks actually, though they participated, that they were the progenitors of this enslavement, right? And that even if we were to compensate you, the number of compensation that we would give, we can't define because of the damages, and that you're bringing this case out of time period, so you're time barred. So why? She just argued it wrong, and she's not a well, I think she's a lawyer, but she argued the case wrong, and at that time I think she was married to a European. So it was basically a setup cases, and a lot of times in our conditions we have what you call setup cases, a case that's brought before the court that they allow it, that absorbs other cases, that basically has faulty causes of action and faulty premises, that will not be able to actually survive. So anytime that you bring a case that has conclusory statements not well defined, it's ultimately going, and they see it and they allow it so that they can write an opinion on it. And so in the legal realm, as far as getting reparations legally, a case has to be brought forth in a different matter that makes a different type of analysis. And I studied Ogletree, attorney Ogletree, and I've studied other attorneys, and they make the argument about murder and heinous crimes, and in how can I say, if I can't think of the word right now, in uh, where 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 people or states or made their profits, forgot the word, forgot their made their profits illegally, right? And so those are the arguments that would survive, and the argument, because there's no statutory for murder, limit of murder, heinous crimes, engrossment, and the fact of the matter is that states broke their own laws uh, to to um, to become wealthy with the slave trade. So that's my comments about that. Let's go back to some census records and just look at some census records. Okay, so the slave populations in the United States, these some of the states without they weren't the states at this time period, and we get to look at the slave populations from Alabama. From 1820, we have 41,000. By 1850, we have 342,000. Arkansas, 1820 comes into the Union with 1,617 slaves, ends up with 47,000 slaves. The Columbia District of Columbia enters. Um, Slavery here was actually these are places. Some of these places where, how can I say, enslaved were free. But then we have states over here like Georgia enters into the Union 29 with 29,264 enslaved, and then ends up with 381,000. What do we do with this? How do we analyze this? What do we think about? Um, how do we get these numbers through the legal slave trade? Well, the legal slave trade ended about this period here. So still, from Georgia, 105,000 slaves in 1810, where the importation supposedly ended, but it's very close to the illegal smuggling routes, right? You have 381,000. So um, you have almost three times as much as slaves with my cursor enslaved in this particular period. And then you look at some of these other ones, Kentucky, I think Kentucky, 1810, 80,000. This is close to the legal slave trade routes. From 80,000, you have 210,000. Now, humans are not rabbits. It takes a long time for for children to grow, to become even in maybe even counted, right? Um, and so we go on forth. And so from this period over here, 1810, you have 100. This is aggregate. So you have 100 and 191,000 enslaved, and then by 1850 you have 3,204,000 slave enslaved. Now, it's interesting that even up to the point of the Civil War, these numbers come vastly. Now, the Civil War is coming. There's a lot of so now enslaved sell at a higher price, but they're needed more to develop places in the United States that trees need to be cut down, and you need grown men to cut down trees. You don't need no 14, 16-year-old boy. You got to do this by axe, and you got to pull up the roots, right? You got to clear the land. You need fresh saltwater Africans. That's what you need to be successful. So let's go over here. And so these are some of the other states going all the way up to 1880, right? And the populations of enslaved, all the way up to 1880. How do we look at this? Well, we're going to counter the slave breeding versus the illegal slave trade. So Alabama entering the Union with 449 enslaved at the 1820 census. I mean, this is when they entered the Union, right? But uh, they entered the Union here. There's 447,449 enslaved in the 1820 census, but then there's 435 enslaved in 1860 at the beginning of the Civil War controversy. Arkansas enters the Union here, has only 4,000 slaves, 4,576 in the 1830 census, but they have 111,000 slaves in the 1860. In Florida, when it entered the Union in 1845, it entered the Union with 25,000 enslaved in the 1850 census, but ended up with 61,000 slaves in 1860. Louisiana entered the Union in 1812. In the census of 1820, they had 69,000 slaves enslaved, but in 1860 they had 331,000 enslaved. Mississippi enters the Union in 1817 with 32,000 enslaved in the 1820 census. They end up in 1860 with close to 500,000 slaves. From, I guess that's from slave breeding, huh? Mhm. Missouri enters the Union in 1821, 10,000 enslaved, but they end up with 114,000 enslaved in 1860. And and then Tennessee, if I got that right, they entered the Union with 13,000 enslaved in 1800 census, ends up with 275,000 slaves enslaved. In Texas, uh, they entered the Union late in 1845. They have 13,584 enslaved, and in the 1850 census, they have 13,584 enslaved. They entered the Union late, but they ended up in 182,566 enslaved in 1860. So you hear about David Crockett and the Alamo and all of this stuff. David Crockett was fighting for slavery, for Texas rights, the Lone Star rights. So these numbers here are very powerful numbers to offshoot the possibility of slavery. Um, W.E.B. Du Bois, many people don't know, but his dissertation was the suppression of the African slave trade. And what he said was, this is what he says. He says, the enforcement of the slave trade laws from 1770 to 1789, the slave trade was prohibited by all colonies. South Carolina reopened the traffic in 1803. Mr. Du Bois showed that the Prohibitory Act of 1807 was not enforced. More stringent legislation began in 1818. So even though they enacted in 1808, 1807, it wasn't strong enough, so they need more stringent legislative action in 1818, and the slave trade was closed with piracy. Nevertheless, the infamous business was continued, for the United States would not permit the right of search. Even the treaty with England in 1842 failed to suppress the slave trade. Vessels were fitted out for this traffic in every port from Boston to New Orleans. Mr. Du Bois estimates that from 1807 to 1862, not less than 250,000 Africans was brought to the United States in defiance of the law and humanity. This is our great scholar W.E.B. Du Bois. This is his. This is who this man is. This man is analyzing the slave trade, right? His figures. We have more census data to say that his figures were moderate and less, but the fact of the matter is that he said not less than 250,000 Africans was brought to the United States in defiance of the law of humanity. So there's other statements from other scholars, and then in 1860 census, the 1860 census, the slave population of whites was 8,289. Africans enslaved was 3 million. So there was um, close to 4 million, so half in the census of 1860. Um, Yeah. So here um, we examine some of the slave trials of the illegal transatlantic. We know of the Armistead, um, but the Echo is one of those. There's the Echo. There's the Wanderer. There's more than 60 slave vessel cases that we don't know about, that we don't talk about. We only know about the Clotilda, and we know about the Wanderer. Well, the Voyage of the Echo examines the world of the illegal transatlantic slave trade by reconstructing the voyage of the slave ship Echo in 1858. Although the United States outlawed the transatlantic slave trade in 1807, and every other European and American carriers enacted similar by 1836, slave ships brought a further 12 million Africans to the Americas, meaning the Caribbean and the United States, between 1836 and 1866. The Echo voyage from New Orleans, Louisiana, to Cabrina in West Africa, and then to the Spanish colony of Cuba is one example of 3,000 illegal voyages that took place during these decades. So even though we know of maybe 60, 70 cases, the records show that during this period, there were 3,000 illegal voyages that took place. The Echo voyage is an unusual, well-documented case. Historians and law know little about the illegal transatlantic slave trade because most of the slave trading merchants and sailors were not apprehended, and when they were, mostly already destroyed correspondence and account book dealing their voyages. The Echo was exceptional because it was intercepted by a U.S. anti-slave patrol near Cuba and rerouted to South Carolina, where its crew became the subject of a major public trials. Subsequent court testimony, newspaper accounts, and domestic correspondence provides insight into the Echo's course, the capital and network that set its voyage in motion, and the experience of its African captives. And so the Echo is one of those cases that we actually know more about the amount of where they got the Africans from, the amount of Africans, the financing, and etc. Okay. Um, Okay, Louisiana purchased the new territories, the foreign slave trade in Louisiana after 1808. I'm not going to read any of this, but Louisiana was one of those places really close to where they were bringing in African captives, and Louisiana benefited greatly, the state. I'll read one part. Slave smuggling is no exception. Probably the lowest estimate of the extent of American slave trading was that of William Landres Yancey, who asserted that not more than 500 Negroes had been smuggled into the United States after 1808. W. Du Bois, on the other hand, estimates that 270,000 Negroes were illegally introduced into the United States between 1808 and 1860. This paper does not pretend to referee between Yancey and Du Bois, though it is no doubt that the historian's prerogative to say that one estimate is far too low, and of course it is. We have 3,000. We have 3,000 documented voyages, and so let's just see the prohibition of the foreign slave trade to the territory of New Orleans was not rescinded, and in 1808, at the end of the 20-year period prescribed by the Constitution, the prohibition became nationwide, etc. So that's a lot of repeat. So then I can go on and read it. You can actually read, look up the foreign slave trade in Louisiana after 1808 if you need further. Now I'm just gonna talk about some things that I want to talk about in this context. Okay, so I mentioned already the Marshall Trilogy. The Marshall Trilogy was the Supreme Court Justice Marshall. He did 3 cases. He did Johnson versus McIntosh, Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, Worcester versus Georgia. In each of these cases, they looked at the Native American, because the Native Americans, not black Americans, not Negroes, not niggers, but the Native Americans were trying to were finding themselves in court with the Americans on land issues. And so Johnson versus McIntosh, 1823, holding that private citizens could not purchase lands in Native American territories. Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, holding that the Cherokee Nation dependent with a relationship to the United States like that of a ward and a garden. So that's what you call domestic dependent relationship. Worcester versus Georgia, which laid out the relationship between tribes and states and federal government, stating that the federal government was the sole authority to deal with the Indian nations. So they're a ward of the United States, they get a federal trust, they get land, and they get domestic dependent status. But where's the case for the African? The African cases are all commerce cases. The counter narrative is that the plantations such as Virginia were breeding farms from enslaved, from the enslaved. The data shows I talked about that, and Dr. Gerald Horn is one of our greatest writers of scholars, and he's written um, more information that you can look to understand the illegal slave trade, Negro comrades to the crown, African Americans in the British Empire fight for the U.S. before emancipation, racial revolution, United States and Cuba during slavery and Jim Crow, the color of fascism, Lawrence Dennis, racial passing and the rise of the right wing extremists in the United States, the counter revolution of 1836, Texas slavery and Jim Crow and the roots of U.S. fascism, the deepest South, United States, Brazil, and the African slave trade, the apocalypse of settler colonialism, the roots of slavery, white supremacy, and capitalism in the 7th century in North America and the Caribbean, the counter-revolution of 1776, slave resistance, and the origins of the United States of America. Um, Further references, I'm putting this on the screen. One or two of them I might pull out, but these are some of my resources and references in dealing with the illegal slave trade. Um, there's a president that we don't know. His name is John Tyler. Um, he was dealing with the illegal slave trade. The Webster Dictionary that we read often, Daniel Webster was a lawyer. They constructed Webster, actually, Daniel Webster, who we love, like Wikipedia, he constructed the law that British ships could not search American ships at sea. And that was a green light for the illegal slave trade because of the British. There were the African squadron, and then there was the British. Um, they had two squadrons: the British squadron and the African squadron. The African squadron only had about 5 or 6 ships. The British had more because of their vested interest in not having a enslaved army. But the Daniel Webster and Tyler stopped the British from searching American ships because it was a property. However, and that was just a loophole. Um, Obadeli Starks, Ernest Obadeli Starks, he was a colleague of Dr. Issa that passed away. He wrote an incredible book called Freebooters and Smugglers, the Foreign Slave Trade in the United States after 1808. That is probably one of the best uh, modern documents on the legal slave trade. Um, there are stories about the slave trade, Thomas Hugh. And then I already talked about this over here, the right of search and the slave trade in the Anglo-American relations, 1840 to 1862, right? Which you can search, which you can look up. So there's the Webster Ashburn, Daniel Webster Ashburn Treaty, which was the green light for the illegal slave trade to kind of continue. There's the African slave trade reopened or suppressed, 1850, 1860. We can read President Tyler's correspondence where he is looking at American interests hiding the illegal slave trade, understanding that Americans should ships should not be searched. Um, we have other things. Taney is a defense attorney for a slaver. So, um, if you know anything about Taney and Dred Scott, um, Taney earlier in the Dred Scott decision, he was actually a defense attorney for slavers. So he should have been recused. The Negro and the Constitutional Records, slave ship cases. Joseph Story is an incredible resource on the illegal slave trade, how he was a Southerner who fought in the Confederate War, who talked about the slave trade, the illegal slave trade, and basically the South's position on the slave trade. And we have the Wandering case. And so let's see what else I have. Um, Talked about that. Talked about in my paper, my motion to the Supreme Court for amicus status, friends of the court status. Um, I highlighted these cases over here: Gibbons versus Ogden, and Worcester versus Georgia, which I talked about. The United States versus the Armistead and Dred Scott decision. These cases that ended up in the American record, they are very problematic. The United States versus Armistead was, of course, a ship that was I forgot, Spanish or Portuguese ship that was taken over by Africans and landed up in I don't know. I forgot exactly if it was Boston or New York. I forgot where it was actually landed. But what they did was they did not deal with the illegal slave trade. They really only dealt with the, uh, the fact that it was whose property it was. Was it American property or Spanish property? And the fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, what you have now, this is important, what you have now is that you have these slave ships coming into the United States, and that the United States now grabs these the captives, the enslaved Africans, and sells them into the states. So they don't. Yes, in some cases they put them on a colony to go back. Those things failed. There was also a case that Patrick DeLises gave me where Abraham Lincoln tried to send 400 Africans that were contraband from the Civil War back to an island off of Haiti. That was a failed experiment from its get-go. That was President Abraham Lincoln's solution. But we have issues of so what I didn't do is I didn't check the so give me a second. I'm going to check the YouTube video, and I think I'm going to close soon, but I just want to check what's happening on the YouTube, because I just want to see if there's anything that I want to respond to. Okay, okay, so anything that, hey, Sister Juju, how are you? Okay, so she says the Armistead and Talladega College in Alabama have a unique relationship. Let's see what's going on. Peace to you, Smash, one of my favorite scholars. Yeah, so Kyle, yes, fresh saltwater Africans. That's a term, Kyle, for Africans coming directly from Africa, not going to the Caribbean. So saltwater Africans, or Africans that are captured in Africa and go straight to the Americas, and there it's a term called saltwater Africans. Instead of those that's going to the Caribbean for a gestation period or coming from Cuba or some of those other places. So it's a technical term. I didn't make it up. my one of my other favorite scholars, Each One Teach One, and Historian. We taking Reggie FBA strikes. I don't know why. Uh, okay. Tyrone, okay. So anything else I want to do? Born Dog, peace to you. Garfield, spell his name right. Uh, okay. Why all caps? Stuff like that. Okay. So there's nothing in the chat. Put my Cash App. So Cash App. Don't forget, if you want to support my work, you can find me on Cash App here. I mean, what's the point of doing all of this research and making these arguments for our people, and they don't, you just don't donate to the research. Um, Shalom fam. So which slave trade was the legal slave trade? So Prince of Yahweh, the slave trade up until 1808 is what you call the legal slave trade. It's not moral, but it's in the laws of the states. You have states' rights and you have the federal law, right? So the United States is what it is. It's the United States. States have their own rights. The federal law is the law in which no right that the federal law prescribes that no law can go below. States' rights, states have the ability to write their own, create their own identity. They're like little living bodies. They can combine in the United States. So that is a whole portion of the reason or the rationale for the Civil War. States' rights versus the federal law rights. Okay, states were more concerned about not just the slave trade, but their right inside the federal government. So anything, and so states once the states enacted laws, they were legal. And so I went earlier and I talked about the old Virginia colonist laws, and then they migrated to when the United States was formed in 1776. Yeah, they formed themselves into the United States law. So in law, right, if you want to argue law, the fact of the matter is we're not talking about morality and God's law and none of that stuff. We're talking about legal documents that the populations consider uh, legal. Anything else? States' rights wants them Republicans want to what everything is states' rights. What them Republicans want to what they want to us. Well, um, I hate to break it to you, but the Abraham Lincoln Party was Republicans, and the Democrats were the enslavers. I hate to break it to you all. There are people who are Lincoln Republicans, right? The Democrats actually, if you really want to look at it, they have done more harm to African people from the civil rights movement up until here. They have not fought for our rights. They have benefited as a party and as a group, but they have not done anything. They're on the fence. The Republicans, the modern day Republicans, um, they seem to be vested in states' rights because they know that controlling the state controls the populations within, and that states' rights in white states, white people have a high quality of living in those majority states that are white, and they don't want problems teaching Black studies, African studies. They don't want that in their states because their states are largely populated by whites. So that's why I wrote the Black City Plan to let you all understand that there's also another right or legal body, which is to call the city and the county. And in the city and county where there are majority Black populations, we can in fact get de facto reparations. We can repurpose land. We can repurpose monuments. We can control tax structure. We can control the corporations that are coming as parasites to us. There we can grow things like Negro leagues and other entertainment bodies within cities. You have to understand what happened in Motown and Detroit and the possibilities that we had. But then the pariah corporations come in and now they suck our entertainers out of our cities and states. They suck our um, they suck taxes out, right? They suck. So what we do is forget that arm, leg, and all that hocus pocus. Every part of us, every month, goes to a corporation and is unrestrained. Who can restrain it? Cities and states where they can make better deals with corporations. So when you analyze and you understand states' rights and city rights, states are comprised of cities. Um, um, Majority black cities are very important. That's where we are. Um, we have to do one. We have to get elected officials in that represent the majority populations. And then, if you watch any of my shorts, another ingredient is a very important ingredient, which is called the town hall. We should not let police and them have their little press conferences. We control the police. We pay their salaries. We control the mayor. We control all of that stuff. We should not allow them to do these pseudo press conferences where they never tell us what is going on or who, if there's police and other groups of people that are involved, they never give us the records. That is not how it works. I've studied, I study history, all history, to understand what we can do. Studied the foundations of America because that's where we are. It is the town hall. It is the town hall that formed the revolution in the American Revolution. It was from the town hall. We today have much more ability to construct and create town halls that are live streamed around the nation, right? That we can bring in the offending elected officials and authorities into the town hall where we sit at the table and we pull them up into the tables to testify. We have to fix the power structure. That's why I study American history and I study white cities to create something called the Black City Plan based on how the loopholes of America. Anything else? Peace to you, Gordon Sam Hines, my good brother. Peace, Cedric. Um, so Prince says Cedric Ortega. So legality is ruled by who has the most power and not choice or agreement within a group or party. Well, again, we're talking about laws. There's the laws can be by the courts, um, or the laws can be done by elected officials. Those in America. If you want to path to power, you have to understand completely how the system works to understand how to make the system work for you. The Irish did it, the Jews did it, the Mormons did it, the Italians did it. Other groups did it. You use cities to enact laws, right? If it counters to the federal court, the federal laws, then cities can sue states can sue the federal government. Individual cases, well, not well funded, etc. But cities, black cities, can sue states, and states can sue the federal government. I'm telling you just how things work. I mean, I have a pretty decent education. I'm just telling you how it works. So let me just move on so I can close. Other sources: Barracuda story, the last black cargo, Zoro Neale Hurston. So that deals with the the last slave, Kojo, Kojulu. I talked about freebooters, and and talked about my articles. Now, Ogletree, I'm not going to pull this up, but I'll leave this as a resource for you. He talked about heinous crimes as a Ogletree attorney. Ogletree is had a health crisis, but he was one of our best attorneys coming from Harvard, and he wrote one of the documents that we can actually use. There is a document that I want to pull up, if I can, on slave ships. And Nathaniel Gordon, the last one on the list is Nathaniel Gordon. Nathaniel Gordon was the only slaver that was ever executed. He was executed in New York. So the only slaver that was ever executed for the whole history of the illegal slave trade was Nathaniel Gordon. He was executed in New York City, in Manhattan. Give me a second to see if I can find this. I want to show the what I want to show is the some of the slave cases, so that so I can actually give you an idea of some resources where you could actually see. So maybe I don't see it. I don't know why it's not here. Okay. Uh, yeah, the strange slave ship cases. Okay, so maybe here. So let's see if this is it right here. Sorry. So let's bring this up. Uh, let's see if I can. Oh, that's why. Okay, so let me just. I have to exit the screen. I have to exit the screen to get that document. Okay, so it's here. So it's here, and I want to just show you some of the slave cases. Just had it. Uh, okay, so let's see this right here. Bring this over here. Bring this here. So, like I said, there's a lot of issues that we have to deal with. The issue of people identity. We were Hebrews. We were Moors. Where are the cases? Where are the records? Where is the communities of these groups of people? I know that the Africans were being converted into a society. You know, in the South, there was a large Jewish communities in the South, and they actually fought for the Confederate Army, and their enslaved actually had Hebrew traditions from their masters. So, is that how you say you want to get it? Right? Do you want to say that you got it from the slavers that came from the Americas, from South America? Is that what you want to say? So the African slave trade, a selection of cases from the records of U.S. district courts in the states of Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. So I'm just going to scrub through here. I'm not going to go over it. Just to let you know that this document. So these are some of these slave trafficking cases in here, Georgia, right? So you see these cases, U.S. versus Brig Ida, U.S. versus Schooner, right? Let's just continue. So these are all these are slave illegal slave trading cases, right? That actually made it to court. So, and this is only in some southern states. So this is the efforts of the squadron of capturing slave ships. So all of these are after the period of 18, most of them after the period of 1808. But remember, there are states that had stopped the importation earlier by paper. This is U.S. District Court for Southern District of Alabama. So these are cases in that area. So these are actual cases of ships that were caught at sea with the for illegally transporting Africans. Okay. And this is just in 3 or 4 states that we have. Okay. North Carolina, South Carolina. So, so that's the record. So with that said, I think um, if that's um, I think I've pretty much done with my articles that I want to talk about, unless I have to bring it up. If you want to, okay, I'll bring this in. So this is from the digital archives of in the Schomburg. So let's just start from here. So this talks about populations. It talks about the African experience. This is where I got some of my maps and grabs from. And so uh, it gives you what's in the Schomburg in their digital collection as far as materials and information around the enslavement of African people from various periods. I picked out things from the domestic slave trade to show that that argument falls flat on its face. There's here states and African Americans going west at that particular period, which is interesting because African Americans going west as enslaved. Um, Another one, population from Caribbean countries in 20 metropolitan areas. So Dr. Tyreen Wright wrote this book. Oh man, she wrote Booker T. Washington's "The Making of the Pan Africanist," which is probably one of the most important books, though it's small. Here she talks about the African exclusion measure, which Booker T. Washington fought for to allow Africans to come back into America after this act for the prohibiting the importation of slaves. And that act allowed a lot of people, allowed our populations from the Caribbean to come back into the America. If it wasn't for Booker T. Washington fighting for that, they would have still been prohibited from coming into America. Yeah, this is we know very little about Africa, though and that's because of our identity crisis. And so we don't know much about slavery in Africa or or what happened in Africa as far as the slave trade and where our people were taken from. And we don't know anything about the ethnicities of the African. So tonight, depending on 6 or 7 o'clock, depending on when I could get a time slot, I am going to go to an area of Africa that we don't like to talk about. I'm gonna go and we have these issues about African culture and things like human sacrifice and things like that. And we have a whole another group of people called the Kemetics, and everything in Africa, everything in that civilization was Ma'at. Everything was Ma'at. Ma, brush your teeth with it. Um, well, after ancient Egypt, well, all of these issues about the culture. We can, from the writings, those of us who can read it, like Smash Rockwell and others, particularly the scholars, Dr. Beatty and Dr. Raketi Amen and Dr. Mario Beatty, and then I am a mid-grade Metanetia reader. So I am I'm mid-grade. I'm not. How can I say, a little bit after the introductory level, but I supplement that with my knowledge of Egypt itself, and so but I'm a mid-grade reader of the Meta Nature. I really, most of my best work is not really direct translations. My best work is verifying, right? And that is, I think, a practice that we should be better at, verifying what the Meta Nature says instead of trying to translate whole passages. We can look at other sources. But my point of what I'm trying to talk about is that what I want to do is I want to talk about a community in Nubia, because Africa, after Egypt fell, there are elements of Egyptian Nubian culture that survived in the Nubia and the Sudan, further than Nubia, the Sudan, and that there was a lot of communication. And so when there's a field of linguistics, which I don't know, but that is comparing language families, but you can also compare culture. People don't do a lot of comparing culture, but I have picked a culture that is very, very well resourced called the Shylocks. And I want to talk about Zim. This is a group of surviving Africans from the Islamic slave trade after, certainly after the Turkish Ottoman assault into Nubia and Sudan, hunting for slaves, depopulating Africa. They survived, and they have characteristics that are very close to what had happened in Kermer and in the Nomes. And I want to talk about some of those things. So please don't cry. Please don't cry when I talk about it. And I'm not talking about it to bring out anything bad. I think it's beautiful. I think it's our culture. I think we have to understand our past, and we have to put in practices that how can I say, do check and balances on cults, small cults and things like that. And some of their characteristics are very close to pre-dynastic Africa, and some close to the Nile Valley. The Nile Valley, Egypt, if I want to say the Egyptian part, was much more, they had much more laws, much more writing. Here, we have much more oral traditions. So with that said, Garfield, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I hope my work was kind of helpful to understanding at least the illegal slave trade. So there you go. Let me read the chat. I don't know where Garfield is, but let me read the chat. Cedric, as I stated, the commodity is not part of creating legality. Let's just see. Don, where the ships the Europeans came from? Each one teach one. Look at the slap. Don answers the question. Don, where the ships the Europeans came on? Let's see what Don is talking about. Because don't mess with Rob Bond in Black American history. Don't mess with true story in Black American history. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Juju, for putting up Dr. Wright's book. Let's go.
I'm here, brother Reggie.
Okay, so I'm basically ended my 20 for 20. Finally, Garfield.
Finally. I'm gonna Hey, listen, I'm I have my other channel, Dagger Squad, so I've been going on there live a couple of times. I'm gonna start doing what's called a study group where we just try to pool our minds together. And when Smash is not live and when Sula Kill is not live, so we could build on topics instead of so that people could see how we reach the conclusions. Just like how Smash we pull out the Mejanet and all that stuff. Because I think the Christian conversation with Tazaria, I just think it's stupid. We continue to have these debates that nobody could win. Nobody knows who wrote the New Testament. So they say that they copied or plagiarized. You don't know who did it, but you're gonna claim that they did. But let's have some fun. I wanna go over this Chris Harris debate and see what happens. But if anybody wants the Does anybody want to jump on or have a conversation? All you got to do is make a donation to Brother Reggie's Cash App, and you could come ask a question. That's all we're doing the questions today. If you got a question, hit the Cash App and jump on. That's it. Hit the Cash App and jump on. That's how we're doing it today. Reggie laughing. I got my own rules for you, Reggie.
Well, I appreciate it because you know what? How can I say? I was so interested in you having that debate with Himnechatepi, the
Yeah.
and that worked out. But
Hey, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, we're doing a part 2 to the Malcolm X Elijah Muhammad NOI show. We're going to do a part 2 to it. The part 1, I got a lot of phone calls. So I got my man Malcolm Flex. He's going to be there. My brother, another brother, Mark, he's going to be there. I'm going to be there. We're going to go over some information that we didn't get to go over. And sometimes, and I tell everybody, doing 20 for 20, I'm just the interviewer, man. I'm just putting stuff out. People going to have disagreements. And Rastaman say, I got a question, but my Cash App is not working.
yeah, I lost my. How can I say I lost my dog? You know,
Oh man,
the goat ate my term paper. But look, I'm always available. It doesn't pay, but I've had an exceptional education in African American studies and African culture, and I wish it would pay more. So because it takes me people complain on Sanez's channel, I would like to put up more content, but I just don't like to argue and throw up. I give resources. You don't have to. I don't hide my sources. You don't have to look for it. I put it up. So it takes me a longer time period to put up content. So that becomes some of the problems. But look, Garfield, I don't see any big questions, so it'd be different if I thought.
Let's end the show. It's all over an hour and a half, and what we're gonna do, family, I'm gonna do a show on. I don't know what the schedule is tonight. Let me hit up Sonnet and see what's going on. But I want to say thank you for doing this, and
thank you, and for everybody that donated, I received $71.
Okay.
And
wow. Nice.
Is that nice?
That's nice. Wow.
I received 71. Well, thank you for everybody that contributed to me and to my work. I so appreciate it. Let me see who's here, who donated. Visa, thank you so much. Gordon Hines, thank you. Lenny, thank you. Gregory Spotsville, thank you. The Truthless, thank you. Anthony Smith, thank you. Gordon Hines gave me half of it was from Gordon Hines. So thank you, Gordon Hines, and everybody else who contributed. I take $1, I take $5, I take $10. Thank you so much. You'll have my Cash App. Garfield, thanks for inviting me on 2020. So what do you think? What did you generally think, Garfield?
Well, I like the whole reparations argument you made as far as pointing out that it's going to be locally. And I noticed when you said that years ago, now they're doing it after years after you've been saying it. Now they decide, hey, you know what? We can't do it that way. You know what I'm saying? But I think there's this fake 5% guy that's on here now, wearing the 7 God hat. He want to start some trouble. Go ahead, Rob Bond. What's on your mind, brother?
Oh, that's a teacher.
What's going on, man? How y'all doing, man?
I'm gonna call Don for him. That's what I'm gonna call.
Yeah,
Go
bring
ahead,
him. Yeah, man. There's a lot of people in the chat. I don't know why y'all got a problem with the brother brought out asking these dumbass questions. Where's the slave shit? I'm tired of that. So I told you we pimp slapping you. We doing one question killers. Where the fuck is the ships that the Europeans came on? If you can't show me the ships that the Europeans came on, then they indigenous to America. End the discussion. Night. Yeah, man. Reggie, what's going on, man?
Oh, man.
I think I sent you a Cash App. I think I said FBA slapping niggas.
From a scholar, when a young scholar sends me a Cash App, man, I am so privileged. Shit. When Garfield sends me a Cash App, boy, I know I'm cooking, right? I so appreciate the support. On this, thank you, Devon, and thank you, Alfonso. Thank you, and I see the FBA slap. I see you, so thank you. Listen, you have to understand that ships were fitted. I showed you the cases. I showed you more than 50 cases, which you can go and read and see how they were fitted. We don't have to argue. That's the one thing about arguing with Garfield, Trustorian, Rob Bourne. They're going to show, Reggie, they're going to show you the evidence. The evidence was already there. I gave you the cases. Go argue with the cases. The cases are already settled. The bad thing about it is when ships were captured with Africans, they were sold to the states. The states got free for their effort in those cases. They got free contraband. So, with that said, I think I'm.
Where are the FB? Where are the internet Indians? All of y'all was in the chat. Hit the link, hit the Cash App, and hit the link. Where you at? You talked all this crap. You wasn't paying attention to what you saw, so that means you want your voice heard. Soon as y'all saw the goddamn title, I never even seen you guys in my life before. Now you want to come pop out the woodworks. Come up here and deal with the information, man. Do you have the heart to do it, or are you gonna hide in your ship in the chat?
Hiding your TP. Look,
Yeah.
Their problem is my problem is if you don't know who your great grandfather is, right? Your great grandmother, your great great grandmother. Please just don't waste your time with people, right? I mean, my family is involved in this, right? I mean, we have heritage, right? If you don't know your heritage and you want to talk about other people's heritage or your imaginary friends, don't waste our time. Nobody's listening to you in 2020, 2023. Nobody's listening to you. You don't even have evidence in your own family. So what's the point?
Can't even
You
use that.
other people, huh?
You can't even use that argument no more because they play games with the genealogy, stealing other people's genealogy, bro. Like, it's a weird type of thing they do. But to the chat that's listening to Reggie and y'all saying that those people was dead, they not dead, bro. They all over every different social media platform, from Twitter Spaces to Clubhouse, and they doing something new, Reggie. They mix up all of the conscious online community information. They got some 5% in there. They got some NOI in there. They got some Hebrew shit in there. They got some more shit in there. They got, I don't know how they did the RBG. They got all of that mixed up in it, Reggie.
Yeah, but that's YouTube. What happens is outside of YouTube, let me see what you wrote. I want to see your articles, right? That's YouTube. That's your how can I say, you're falsely influencing people based on YouTube. YouTube is entertainment for the most part. Let me see what you wrote. All right, put something on paper so I can cite it and rebut it. But most of you, unfortunately, a lot of those people, they can't write. And yes, they're messing up the genealogy data, but what about the census records, right?
Hey, I don't want to interrupt you, Brother Reggie, but we do have somebody for Rob on ZTS Media. Can I come on the panel? Yes, you can come on the panel. And also, Brother Malcolm Flex said he donated. I don't know if he got a question.
Oh, I know Malcolm Flex. Peace to you, Malcolm Flex.
Yo, Malcolm Flex, yo, you gotta prove y'all cool, bro, before you come on. We not letting you come on to talk about the NFI until you prove y'all cool. I'm just playing with you. I'm just fucking with you, bro.
I think we got somebody for Rob on ZTS Media. Come on in. I see his avatar. He coming for you, Rob on.
Yeah, that will come on. Smacking niggas. Be FBA slapping niggas. Come on. We're gonna slap you right with the information, bro. Oh, your kid is there. All right, so let me stop that. We're gonna FBA slap you, brothers. You getting slapped. It's not even a regular slap. You get pimp slap, like backhand, you heard? You get the backhand, you heard? You don't even get a regular slap. You getting backhand. Come on. Where you at?
Big up to everybody in the room. Big up, Brother Reggie.
Peace,
Nice
VP.
presentation. Peace to all. Um, I just wanted to add on one thing. Not add on. I can't add on to your work. We're not in the same league. Your league's above me. I just wanted to share my impression of the whole American slave trade. Um, what I have seen is that the American slave trade have two different separate stages. You have pre the cotton gin and post the cotton gin. Pre the cotton gin, slaves in America were only about 700,000. By the end of the Civil War, you had 4 million slaves in America, right? When before cotton, 90% of the crops that was planted in America was basically tobacco and dyes, some grain, some rice. They were making some money and some cotton on the coastline. But the cotton that we know today wasn't the cotton that was being planted. The seeds were too hard to extract. But with the cotton gin inventor Eli Whitney, what 1890 had, he invented the cotton gin. And this resulted in an explosion of slaves. But what was happening at that time, 1770, if it wasn't for Eli and the invention of the cotton gin, slavery in America may have had been abolished.
Yeah,
Because
you missing the big one, Sweet Pea. You missing something really big, bro. And
which big one?
you missing sugar because the
No,
sugar. Yeah,
sugar
yeah.
wasn't being planted in America.
But this
Sugar
is
wasn't being
hold
planted in
on,
America.
hold
All
on,
right.
slow down.
Mm,
Wait a minute.
mm.
This is where you gotta understand the intercontinental trade. So when you look at the most slaves that come to the Americas or the
No,
sponsorship,
no, no, no,
can I
no,
wait?
no, no.
Yo,
No,
can I
I'm not.
finish,
You're
brother?
cutting my
Wait a
bit. No,
minute.
no, let me finish.
No,
Let me finish. Let me finish.
no,
Cause you
man.
cutting my
You
bit. When I
yeah,
finish, you can
but
go.
you
I'm
but
talking about United States of
But you
America.
under we
I'm not
talking
talking
about
about the Caribbean.
hold on, bro. What I'm saying is that you incorrect, and I'm trying to do it in a nice way, brother.
All right, tell me how I'm
What
incorrect.
what I'm telling you is that the most slaves that are in the Americas is sponsored from
I
North
am talking
America.
about United States of
I am
America.
talking about the
Was sugar
United
being
States.
planted in them?
Yo,
Was sugar being planted in
you
United States
gotta
of America?
stop. You gotta stop
Okay,
and listen, bro.
okay.
Let me ask you a question, bro. Out of all of the sponsorships through the intercontinental trade, where was that happening at in America?
Repeat the question.
Did it or did it happen in the north? Hello?
Answer your question. I won't say anything. I don't know. Let me say I
No,
don't know.
and that's the point. So it's coming from the north, and that's dealing with Rhode Island, and those are the people who make the rum. In order to make the rum, you get the sugar. So this is the intercontinental thing. The sugar comes, like
Uh,
you said, from the Caribbean. The sugar also
okay,
comes from Louisiana. The
okay, all
plantations in
right.
Louis. Now let me finish, bro. The biggest commodity is the sugar. And the people who are doing this are the people who are dealing with that rum, and those are the Jews. Those are Aaron Lopez and all of those other brothers.
Okay,
They sponsored 1,000 ships that brought 100,000 people to the Americas from Rhode Island, bro. So if you're gonna tell a story,
okay.
tell it right, man.
All
Damn,
right.
that's
Let
all
me
I'm
tell the
saying,
story.
bro.
Let
You
me
went
tell the
crazy,
story.
man.
No, no, I didn't go crazy. Let me tell the story. Because I didn't allow me to finish. Sugar was not one of the major in United States I'm talking about, and I don't
Yo, I'm
generally
gone,
talk about
bro. I
United
gotta
States.
go, bro.
Sugar
You
wasn't
don't
one of
know
the
what you're
major.
talking about.
Sugar was a
You
major
don't know what you're
commodity in the
talking
United States of
about.
America.
You don't know what you're
Are you
talking
saying
about.
that
I gotta go, bro. I
sugar in
gotta
America
go,
was
bro.
close to sugar in Brazil and sugar
Hey,
in the
yo,
Caribbean?
bro. What I'm telling you this,
Are you
bro.
familiar with Rhode Island?
He don't know, man. He doesn't
You
fucking
Yes,
read.
but it
familiar
So
wasn't
with
you
Rhode
planted
Island?
don't.
on the same.
Why would you say that then?
Okay.
Sugar is
No,
what they
no.
use to make the. See what's his name? Put
Yeah.
it right here. The molasses. The dude NYNB right here.
Yes, but
Molasses to
I am
rum.
talking about the volume. It was not the
Yes,
same volume.
that's a major part of the
Okay.
slave trade.
All right, let's look at
Take a time out, man. You coconuts. That's why I told you y'all gotta stop talking about Black American history. Stay your ass in coconut land, man.
Yo, you stupid, yo. Hey, Zab the
What's up?
symbol. What's up, bro? What's in your mind? You come for raw bone, bro?
No, I ain't come from Rob, but I came for the conversation because I've been seeing this a lot online, the rise of the Aboriginal movement, and I think it's just the latest emanation of descendants of primarily West Africa and how we came into America via slavery. And our history is a history of mostly slavery. And a lot of people don't like to connect with that because, that is a history of oppression. But there is a counter narrative. The earliest, according to my research, that I can put black people in America is Jamestown, where they did have some free blacks living amongst enslaved blacks. So there is a history of black people being in America for going on 500 years, which, in my opinion, makes the descendants of that native to America. But due to the fact of a constant influx of Africans and Europeans into America, unless you check the records and your genealogy, you can't say for sure what your lineage is.
Oh, okay. I don't think 1619 Jamestown is the first where we find it. There's I don't know if you
1526 FBA, stand up.
All right, go ahead, Rob. Respond.
You were gonna say you don't think Jamestown is the first.
Yeah, it's not the first when African.
So which one would you say predates Jamestown?
Yeah, anything that's Spanish and the Portuguese, so Florida, South America,
South Carolina, 1526. You have Africans there.
No, was that an established settlement?
Yes.
Yeah, it was right here. It was right here in what you would call that Florida area. That's 1526. That's actually one of the first revolts here. And then you have, what I'm saying is, because then you have black conquistadors who are coming in the 1500s who are free black people. So that's Margarito. That's those people.
I was gonna say, I also have a challenge where I said, no one can prove that prior to 1501 there was any black person in America.
Okay, that's valid. My presentation was dealing with the British, of course, the British, the Dutch, and the
hold on, brother Reggie. When you said America, you mean the United States of America, right?
Right. British, right? That's why I started with the British and the Dutch. It's not dealing with the Spanish and the Portuguese. They were first, and then that was a threat to the British Empire because it was at war, and so they started hijacking. Portuguese ships and Spanish ships for their colony, right? So my issue really deals with the reparations army. We can't look, sue Spain and Portugal. That's the Catholic Church. My issue is that we have clauses of action to sue the United States. And so my area was about the state in the United States violating their own Constitution Act. Okay, that's all I want to say.
Garfield, can I say something now, please? Please, let me finish what I'm saying.
Go ahead.
Rhode Island wasn't producing any flipping sugar. Rhode Island was importing sugar from the Caribbean. As I said earlier, I was talking about the crops that were primarily produced in America. I never saying that they never get raw production from other islands and use and make secondary goods. That's part of the trade. I did not say that. Anybody can go back and listen to what I was saying. I was saying that prior to the cotton gin, most crops produced in America was tobacco, indigo, and some rices and grains. That even Jefferson was thinking about abolishing slavery from the 1700s. Reggie can agree with that. He said it. From 1770, it was part of Jefferson's plan. He was one of the major persons who wanted to abolish the trafficking of slaves from Africa to the Americas. After the invention of the cotton gin, things changed. Although the transportation of slaves was abolished, the profit margin from this new cotton, not the same cotton that was grown on the coast, but this other cotton, that seeds were harder to get out with longer fibers, resulted in people stealing slaves and going backdoor. That's what caused people to go backdoor. It was the money from the cotton, the new cotton. If it wasn't for the cotton gin, probably we need to go after Eli with this family. Because if it wasn't for his invention, slavery would not have ballooned from 700,000 in 1810 census or whatever that census was to 4 million after the Civil War. What was the catalyst? Cotton.
No, it wasn't. It was called national increase. And this is the same thing that
What was called
Jefferson.
national increase?
Can I finish, bro? Like, since you run around, he posted a book. The book is called Slave Breeding and Slavery on the Coast. So once they abolished slavery, the British do this in order to keep money coming or keep these people building. They had these slave breeding plantations. You would have a woman that would be offer her freedom if she has 13 children. And we have the slave narratives of them telling us about these things. The people telling them themselves. That's how the population. Stop, man. Yo, listen, chill,
What is
bro.
the why? Why?
Yo,
What is the
listen,
why?
yo,
What is you're talking because you have information.
man, you don't know what you don't know what you're talking about, bro. If you don't know what you're talking about, just stand down, son. You be around dudes showing books, but you don't read the book. Like, come on, son. Unc showed you the book in his hand. It's called Slavery Coast. It's slave breeding. The reason why they did this, Jefferson even called it national increase. He called it that.
Why did they breed additional slaves?
Yo, man, this is
no. You're saying the what, bro. But I'm asking the why. You are saying the what, I'm asking the why. Why did they breed additional slaves?
Are you deaf? Are you purposely not hearing what I'm saying?
I'm hearing you. Why did they breed them?
Okay,
wasn't it for cotton?
No, I'm done, bro.
Didn't they breed these additional slaves for cotton production?
Yo, this is why FBA exists, because of you coconut niggas, bro. You niggas stop talking about our shit, bro.
Your logic. What point are you trying to prove exactly by identifying the cotton and pre-cotton? Because I kind of missed the point you were trying to make.
All right. And this is going to be controversial. My thing is this, that if we look back at it, and we look back at the history, it's not like in the Brazil, the Haitian, or the Caribbean, the rampant use of slaves in the Americas was a direct result of cotton production, which lasted only about 73 years between the invention of the cotton gin and the abolishment of slavery. Prior to the cotton gin.
No, I was going to say I have a different take on it. What I think happened was, due to the free labor of slavery and the fact that America at the time was in competition with Great Britain, once America broke off from Great Britain didn't have any incentive to continue to allow America to gain wealth. So if you notice, Great Britain outlawed slavery, and Great Britain had the strongest navy on the planet, and they were actually patrolling the seas, and they were the ones intercepting a lot of these slave ships. It was a direct attack on America, and eventually, the fact that they couldn't really bring over slaves anymore, and once America started breeding slavery in-house, it was the beginning of the collapse, because now you have Americans being born here, and then the fact that up north, like you said, they weren't really benefiting from slavery. So it was all economic based.
Up north wasn't benefiting from the slave like that before cotton. It's after cotton up north start benefiting from the slave. After cotton, because most of the production of cotton took place up north. The cotton bales were exported up north. Is that when up north start benefiting from the slaves to the full extent? And Britain lost its interest in America because its interest was now with India. The amount of money Britain took from India compared to the Americas. India was the Britain focus now.
Right,
They
but
were
at the same
spread
time,
thin.
they also had to cripple America, who they, remember they just had a war with them.
In 1807, Britain abolished transportation of slavery. In 1838, they abolished slavery. Slave wasn't high on British agenda anymore because of what was happening with the abolitionist movement in England and the upheaval that it was causing, and because the amount of money that they were getting out of India. India was now the new cash cow. So they had no more great interest in the Caribbean. It was
No,
doing
but
what it
no,
was
what I'm
doing, it
saying
was
is
set up.
their interest was also to cripple America because America was still a threat to them. They were still an adversary, and the fact that America was gaining so much wealth and moving so fast, they had to cripple America.
Okay.
It was a rising superpower. We had free labor. You see what I'm saying? We had free labor through the slavery, and if you had Great Britain, who was currently on top, it's like what's going on right now with America and China. So them targeting slavery and forcing America to produce their own slave in house was them choking off America and trying to stifle America and stopping its growth. And in a lot of ways, they were successful. You see what I'm saying?
Okay. Benjamin Franklin went to France prior to the American War of Emancipation, where he borrowed a ton load of money in order to fight the war against Britain. Right? The first really ambassador to America, superstar Benjamin Franklin. Britain knew this. The slave trade as it was not generating the amount of money it was generating in the early 1700s because most of the lands in the Caribbean was now almost destitute because of the farming method that was used to produce sugar. England was not interested in cotton, it was interested in sugar. And they know that sugar was, as after a while, most of the land would be destitute. They were moving away from the Caribbean and
Hey,
into India.
brother Supies, do me a favor, family. This
Yeah.
is what I'm gonna do, man. I'm gonna switch this show because actually this is all about Reggie and his presentation.
Yeah.
And all
All
y'all
right.
on the page ain't give no cash app anyway. So this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put the YouTube in the link in the chat. I want y'all to jump on the YouTube. The YouTube, it's gonna be on the Dagger Squad YouTube channel, not on Brother Garfield podcast. We're gonna continue this conversation and we could talk for 10 hours. All right. So there is a YouTube in the
Yeah, I
chat.
gotta go. I gotta go.
One there. So y'all go. We
I
gonna
gotta go,
transfer this
Garfield.
information.
All right, no
Brother
doubt, no
Reggie,
doubt.
thank you, Rob on. Thank you, brother Stupies. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, I gotta bounce.
And brother Reggie, love you, bro.
Thank you, brother Reggie.
Yeah,
Started the
Reggie,
slave
love
trade
you.
war. Started the slave trade war, Reggie. I put a link in the back of Garfield. If you could press that just so that people could see it.
Hold on. Let me put it right now.
You know,
Hold on. Let me get it right now.
so we want the people to look at this.
I'm gonna put it in the YouTube chat. And listen, man, we coconuts know
Yeah,
y'all history
so, yeah.
too, man. Damn coconut. You a coconut too.
Nah. I don't
Man,
claim my
tell
roots.
Rob on here coconut. So Rob on, you're a coconut.
Robot, you're a coconut.
I am the boss of it. Thank you. I am the boss of it. Yes, I am the boss.
Daddy is the boss of you guys.
That's right. Talk about it. Coconut power in the building. I'm out of here. I'm gonna sign off for this one.
All right, thank you. I will see. I have to prepare for another presentation. Thank you so much.
All right, cool. Peace and love. All right. Thank you, Reggie. Peace. We out.